Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone. Peace be with you. I'm David Grafton, Professor of Islamic Studies and Christian Muslim Relations at Hartford Seminary. And so we are in the third day of the 2020 fourth annual Luce Hartford Conference on Christian Muslim Relations. And we're broadcasting live from Hartford. At least I'm in Hartford. I don't know where you are. We have people from Indonesia and Algeria, Belgium, all over the place. So welcome. This is Zoom webinar, and we're also broadcasting on Facebook Live. So welcome to everyone. This is the fourth annual Luce Hartford Conference on Christian Muslim Relations. And each year this conference gathers Muslim and Christian scholars and religious practitioners to discuss an important and timely theme related to peace, justice, and equality in our world. In our past themes have focused on immigration and refugee issues, the environment, race, and this year we commemorate the 100th anniversary of the women's suffrage movement in the United States with the theme, the agency and vital voices of women, Muslim and Christian religiosity, and scholarship. We've already had 2 evenings of some fantastic discussions and presentations, and I know tonight will be the same. I hope you will enjoy, learn, and be challenged by what you hear. The conference is intended this year to address women's scholarly voices in scripture and theology, the leadership role of women in Muslim and Christian communities, and the impact of female theological and scriptural perspectives on Christian-Muslim relationships. Now, for those who may not be aware of Hartford Seminary, just a few words about us. Hartford Seminary was founded in 1834 and is now a non-denominational graduate school for religious and theological studies. We are very proud to be the seminary of firsts. We're the first seminary in America to admit women to full-time study in a seminary, which is apropos for our topic this year. We're the first seminary to have a full-time Muslim faculty member. And we're the first to have a fully accredited Islamic chaplaincy program. What makes us unique is our multi-faith environment and our proven ability to prepare leaders for a multi-faith world and a complex world that surrounds us. Now, a few words about the webinar this evening and the format for tonight. So all of the attendees and participants who have registered and signed in, you are logged in and you are muted, and you are not visible on the screen. So you don't have to worry about that. And you will not be able to talk, you'll be muted. But we do have a Q&A, a question and answer box for you. If you have questions for any of the speakers that comes to mind, please go ahead and type them right into the Q&A box, and then we will begin to answer those after our panelists have presented. And just a reminder to our panelists, you are also muted, so when you go to speak, please make sure you unmute yourself. I will be timing the panelists at the beginning, so I'll give you the heads up when your time is up. Don't mean to be rude, but just trying to keep us move along a long time. At the end of the evening, we will have the opportunity to take a poll about this conference, and then you will be sent an evaluation through your email, and I hope you will take the opportunity to fill that out. That helps us in our future planning. So this evening we have a panelist. We have a panel of 4 panelists, and I'm now going to introduce my colleague, Chaplain Ida Mansour, the coordinator of the Islamic Chaplaincy Program, and she is going to introduce our panelists. Chaplain Mansour.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grafton. Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. Good evening, everyone. Actually, good morning to some of you. It is truly an honor to be moderating this panel of awesome women leaders. On our panel, we have, and I'll go through them, the Reverend Patricia Ann Curtis Davenport, who assumed office as Bishop of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. It's ELCA, and I'll be mentioning that again, so I'm just explaining that abbreviation. And she assumed this position on August 1st, 2018. Overwhelmingly elected by the Synod Assembly on May 5th, 2018, she is the first African-American woman to be elected a bishop in the 3.8 million member ELCA. She was recently elected vice chair of the ELCA Conference of Bishops. Thank you for being here. Next on the panel, we have Professor Fatma Wahdan Anta, who is Professor Emeritus and Adjunct Professor of Economics at Manchester Community College. She is a founder and trustee of the Islamic Association of Greater Hartford and founder and director of education of the Association Sunday School, a school that caters to over 400 students, K to 12. She's a past trustee of Hartford Seminary and a past president of the Islamic Council of New England, among other positions. She gives lectures on Islam, women in Islam, and the Middle East, and she has been an active organizer for Honest Conversations, a platform for discussion and sharing from Muslims in Connecticut. This initiative was, of course, sponsored by the Connecticut Council for Interreligious Understanding, Hartford Seminary, and the Muslim Coalition of Connecticut. Welcome. Next, we have Lauren Schreiber, who is the co-founder and executive director of Center DC, a Muslim third space that helps people practicing and or exploring Islam grow authentic relationships with other seekers and with God. It's in the metro accessible DC area. Center DC serves over 4,000 people, primarily between ages of 24 and 35, and it does so annually. It also facilitates community through over 150 events each year. Lauren is a facilitator, artist, event curator, and graduate student with a background in youth development, art education, organizing, and community building. And she's currently pursuing a degree in Islamic chaplaincy from Hartford Seminary. Welcome, Lauren. And lastly, we have Dr. Jane Smith, who is retired from her position as Associate Dean for Faculty and Academic Affairs and Senior Lecturer in Islamic Studies at Harvard Divinity School. She taught at Hartford Seminary, where she is now Professor Emeritus. Her academic and personal interests have been in the study of Islam, comparative religion, and Christian-Muslim relations, and she has written numerous articles and books about these subjects. For many years, she has been closely involved with the Connecticut Council for Interreligious Understanding. So I would like to now invite the Reverend Patricia Ann Curtis Davenport to speak about her work, some aspects of her leadership, and some of the opportunities and challenges that she's faced as a woman leader. And then after you finish, if you could go in that order, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Right. Bishop Davenport, should I share your video?
Yes, I was going to say by way of introduction.
All right, here we go.
This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I show up. I'm standing here. I haven't left. Through every trial, every tribulation, every microaggression, I remain. And I remain as a witness that this is a welcome place for all, that there is room at the table for all.
Number needed to elect, 291. Patricia A. Davenport, 337.
our first female African American bishop. As we embark upon this journey together, I am a team player. I lead from within and around the table. Amen. I don't automatically go to the head because I really do believe what I preach. Collaboration, partnership, we do this together.
I ask you in the presence of God and of this assembly, will you assume the office of Bishop of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod?
I will, and I ask God to help me.
People of God, representatives of this synod, will you receive Patricia as a servant of God and a shepherd in the Church of Jesus Christ?
We will, and ask God to help us.
One of the things I've come to learn is that listening is an art. I've come to find that there are two sides to every story, and then there's the truth. So we listen, and then we formulate action steps and how to deal with whatever the issues are. Now, we know our issues are many. So we can start with finances, or we can start with the racial issues. But I think first we need to start with listening to one another and finding out clearly what the concerns are, prioritize them, and then begin to address them. And we do that together. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you by way of introduction. And I'm smiling because, believe it or not, that's the first time I've seen that. So I've been hesitant to kind of watch that. But one of the things that was clear to me is that you can note the racial diversity within the space, within both spaces. And for that, I am grateful to be able to sit in the office of the bishop. So I could say much more about me, but I think that is the red introduction, and that introduction is enough. I really want to be able to entertain questions from all of you. And that was one of the things that I did say to Dr. Grafton. I said, well, prayerfully, someone will have a question for me.
Of course, we'll think of something. Dr. Antar. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, here we go. Thank you, David. Assalamu alaikum. God's peace and blessing be upon you. I want to thank especially Professor David Grafton and Hartford Seminary for organizing this wonderful conference on vital voices of women. I would like to just give you a bit of information about my background so you would have the full picture of a very young Muslim Egyptian woman that came to America and what kind of journey she had. So I come from a Muslim Egyptian family that values education and independence. My mother was one of the first Egyptian young women to go to college and receive a college degree in Egypt. At that time, not too many people could have that chance because Egyptian women did not have at that time a place to go to for college degrees. So well-to-do families would send their daughters abroad to receive college education. So my mother was one of the first few to get an Egyptian degree from college. My mother had a wonderful career as an educator and was very independent. my father always respected her opinion and admired her work. I am my mother's daughter. When I migrated to United States, I had no idea how much I will be involved with the Muslim community and to have a vital voice. So I'm going to tell you some information about what I have done and some of the struggles, as well as some of the opportunities. My husband and I, with few other families, established the Islamic Association of Greater Hartford in Berlin, Connecticut, with a vision of openness, serving God, and serving the community. When we established the mosque, half of the board of trustees were women. As a trustee, I took this position seriously and worked very hard as a volunteer in all aspects to serve the Muslim community. We were an example of how a couple can work together, respecting each other, and to be honest with one another. My voice was heard, and my opinion and the opinion of other women did count and made a difference. I always advised women to know and to demand their rights. Islam is very progressive towards women, but sometimes we make it oppressive. I say we because if women are silent, then we are part of the problem, not part of the solution. In my early years, I didn't shy away from working with men and women, and that was not so common within the Muslim community in America at that time. I was able to establish the Islamic Sunday School with few children, including my own. I worked hard with others, and I ran the Sunday School for more than 25 years. We have around 450 children with different ages. Families come from different parts of the state to enroll their children in our Sunday School because it offers good, balanced Islamic education and is organized. Ali and I, Ali is my husband, are founding members of the Muslim Coalition of Connecticut that was established after 9/11. Actually, MCCT bylaws were written in our house. Media outlets interviewed experts on Islam to talk about Islam and Muslims. They painted Muslims as terrorists and characterized Muslim women as oppressed. Actually, at that time, Muslim women on the board were very upset. They felt that they don't want to be talked about in such a negative way unfairly. They wanted women and men to speak about Islam themselves as Muslims. We established the Speakers Bureau, and I chaired that bureau for a while, for many years. And under the Speakers Bureau, we started also the honest conversations with Muslim neighbors. Actually, Hartford Seminary is a co-partner. We did more than around 50 of those honest conversations where Muslim men and women would speak and answer questions from the audience. So this way, Muslims are answering the questions themselves instead of having someone else to speak on their behalf.
1 more minute.
two additional things I want to say quickly. That I, as the president of the Islamic Council of New England, I had the opportunity to talk with different Muslim leaders within the region. And it was really an eye-opener. It was a wonderful experience for me, good and bad. And during my tenure within Manchester as a faculty member at Manchester Community College, I, with different colleagues, worked very hard to establish an annual conference. It's called the Global Issues Conference, where we focus on one country every year. That was a wonderful opportunity to show diversity, better understanding about culture, religion, business. It was just very, very good. In closing, the voices of women in our religious traditions are very important and vital in promoting service to God and to our communities and fostering peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Jane Smith.
There, can you hear me? Nice to see friends, colleagues, and to make some new friends in this unusual format. My charge, my assignment tonight is to talk about experiences and reflections as a woman leader in activism, work, teaching, and leadership. So I chose, not surprisingly, teaching. I've done that for over 40 years, much of it at Hartford Seminary, time that I enjoyed enormously. My first 2 years of teaching were at Penn State, and then after that I went back to Harvard Divinity School. I had done my doctoral work there, and I had my first chance to interact with Muslims as students in my class, and we learned together. I certainly learned a great deal. And this was in the 1970s, and that was an epoch, an era of enormous change in education, change in society, change in interfaith relations. For example, this was the time of the rise of feminism. And with that, the growing understanding that American feminism or Western Christian feminism may not be appropriate for those in other countries, and it may not be appropriate for Muslims in their various locales. So as teachers at that time, we were teaching in a time which the floor was kind of going like this, and we had to learn to balance. We had to learn to figure out what was the most appropriate for our students, and we had to learn to understand why there was change all around the world, change in the way women were looking at themselves, looking at their traditions, and the ways in which they could talk with us as Christians. One of the other things that was going on at that time was the development of ecumenical dialogue, which for some time had been going on among Christians, sometimes including Jews, but suddenly in this particular era, Muslims were invited to join. And it was a time for us to understand why often it was men who did the speaking and not women, and to see how Muslims, and particularly Muslim women, were dealing with this reality, and not to bring our critique to it too quickly. I just want to say rather quickly how naive I was when I got the call inviting me to come back to be on the faculty at Harvard Divinity School. And I thought, oh boy, this is terrific. They envisioned that I might have a successful career and they would like to support that. Well, no, I discovered when I got back that in fact, this time of growing feminism demanded that institutions like Harvard Divinity School needed to have women on the faculty, and it didn't have any. So there I was, understanding kind of afresh what my purpose was there. but dropped into a situation in which the guiding sense of purpose of the school was in fact to deal with the rise of feminism. Well, I didn't know beans about feminism. I discovered I had a lot to learn in a short time, but that was the time when students were so excited about this issue that they would come to class with bells. And if one, meaning this one for a while, slipped and said he, when in fact it should have been he or even she, all the bells would ring, and it was very embarrassing. I learned quickly that I needed to change to be in touch with where my students were. So I got my feet wet there at Harvard Divinity School. I learned that the traditional Harvard way of teaching, which is pretty much working with basic texts in religious traditions, needed to be challenged. So I spent some time thinking about how to meet that challenge without demeaning the expectations of students who had come precisely because it was Harvard, and Harvard had its particular ways of doing things. And I needed to learn which brand of feminism I wanted to adopt in my teaching, which would be appropriate for conversation in classes, and what I really did not want, and how to explain the fact that I didn't want it. So from there, I went to Denver for a couple of years, and then I came back to Hartford Seminary. This was really coming home for me. I did my own divinity school work at Hartford Seminary, and now I was back on the faculty, and that felt great. For the first time, I had classes, and you all know about this, that had a good balance of Christians and Muslims. That was a real surprise for me, a tremendous challenge, and a great joy. I think one of the greatest joys that I have had as a professor of Islamic studies was to be able to engage in conversation with real live Muslims. I wasn't just teaching about a religion of which I was not even a member. I was teaching to and learning from students coming from various parts of the Muslim world and from the United States. And I loved it. I began to learn in the classroom. I learned when I was teaching. One of my first lessons, in fact, my first class that I taught here was Women in Islam, and I came with a stack of books. And on the bottom, I had the Quran because that was the biggest book. And I brought them into the room. And one of the students, who may in fact be watching this tonight, said to me, "Dr. Smith, you don't put another book on top of the Quran." If I said Bible before, I meant Quran. And quickly, first thing, I learned something, and I've never done that before. I had wonderful opportunities to talk with students, particularly Muslim women students, in my own living room. We would come and have a potluck dinner, and then we just talk about things. And I remember one very interesting conversation. You all have probably had it in many forms, and that was why some of the women wore scarves and some did not, and how did they address each other, and how did they think about the choices that the others have made, and what is it that constitutes an active choice to wear Islamic dress. I know.
1 minute.
Time, 1 minute? All right. I'm going to quickly tell you what I see as 3 of the major changes that have happened in the teaching of Islam. 1, from learning and teaching about Islamic texts to learning and teaching from personal experience with Muslims, especially women. That was an enormous difference from what was happening in some of the more classic theological schools. Number 2, from talking about to talking and doing with Muslims. We've done an awful lot of things together. One of the trickiest things to try to do, and I don't know if it has been successfully done very often, even now, or if it should be, and that is to worship together. The 3rd change, from talking to Muslim women about Western feminism to talking with Muslims, especially women in my case, about how their insights might inform Western and Christian new ways of thinking. So I will leave you with the challenge to continue these things if you think they are worthwhile. It's being done, but it's not being done often enough. So this is my charge to you. Please continue to talk to each other.
Thank you very much. We take that to heart here. Our last panelist is Lauren Schreiber, Executive Director at Center DC.
Oh, assalamu alaikum. Greetings of peace, everyone. Oh man, it's so nice to be with you this evening. I'm really so excited about the Q&A part that's coming. I'm gonna try to get there fast, inshallah. So when getting ready for this little kind of talk, I spent a lot of time thinking about kind of the growth that my own understanding of being a woman in leadership, like where it's gone from start to now, and it's really been kind of a wild ride. I embraced Islam 10 years ago. I celebrated my Shahadaversary in January, so 10 years in January, which is a huge deal. And essentially leadership, is like me seeing women in leadership went from like nothing to being my everyday norm. So when I first embraced Islam, I was with a really supportive, super conservative community where the men and women were 100% separate. So like I wouldn't be able to identify any of the brothers in my first community if I were to pass them by in the street unless they were to say hello to me. I just had no idea who they were. And so there was a lot of sisterhood and really close-knit relationships, and there were leaders among the women that developed, but we were coming from a community where women's voices were never heard from a member, from the front. An example like of what this looked like is even within the local newspaper that my masjid produced, there weren't even women's faces published or printed. And this was in 2010, 11. And so I remember my first time dabbling in leadership in the Muslim community was at this first community. I was really excited about helping to start this youth group. They desperately needed one for the sisters. There wasn't anything being offered. And I was so excited to like help get things started. And they had to like quietly sit me down and somebody explained like, Lauren, you're too new and your dress just isn't modest enough. And so I just remember being fully crushed, like, oh man, there's no space for me here. I understand, okay. So this is what I'm working with. So I kind of kept it moving. And eventually I'd actually, a few years later, had moved on to another community where I was able to help support their youth group and actually was invited to be on the board. I served on the board there for a few years with absolutely wonderful community. But in that space, I still never saw women as like spiritual leaders in that space. I was definitely behind the scenes, had my hands on a lot of different things, but didn't really conceptualize what it meant to be like a Muslim woman who is a leader in a Muslim community. And so I feel like from there, the next kind of really big pivotal thing that happened was a really big rock star imam, Sheikh Suhaib Webb, had moved to the DC area in 2015. And I started working with him and a small group of other Muslim women to see how we could rally up the 20, 30 something Muslim crowd in DC that was largely unmasked to be able to like draw them in with Islamic content. And so Sheikh Suhaib would we'd cram 100 people into the Islamic Heritage Museum and like stack people in front to back. We would line up people up for prayer. And when it was time to speak, we would flip the whole orientation of the room. So now the women are lined up in front so that they could engage in the programming there. And one of the earlier events that we did in this setup with like a bunch of people lined up, I remember Sheikh Suhaib calling on Maggie Siddiqui, who's actually a Hartford-Sem graduate. She's a chaplain, the first woman chaplain I'd ever met who was Muslim. And she was called on to lead dua, so like the closing prayer for our event. And I was just floored. I was like, I didn't even know Muslim women could use their voices out loud in front of people in this way. Like to lead prayer is such a sacred thing that I didn't even know was an option until probably like 2015, 16. And so since then, I pretty much that moment was really pivotal to me because it took, honestly, it took like men in leadership to be able to be like, you can do this. There's space for you. Like people who had enough Islamic knowledge to be able to be like, this is okay. It's permissible for you to do this. Like nobody's catching on fire from you speaking. You can do this. And like from that moment, like I always am combating imposter syndrome, but a lot of the opportunities have been programs like the Hartford Seminary program, the Islamic chaplaincy program. How can I build skills that I was introduced to Sheikha Aisha Prime, who's one of my teachers and mentors. So being able to develop close relationships with other Muslim women who are really educated in the practice. Those sorts of opportunities sort of bolstered me up. And now I'm at the point where it's very regular that I'm leading dua. I'm seeing people kind of one-on-one as a community-based chaplain at Center DC, and being able to like help people troubleshoot their spiritual problems in a way that I never would have thought. If you would have told me 10 years ago that I would be in the position that I'm in now, I would have never believed you, because I just didn't see it being possible. So I feel like really the thing that I just wanted to sort of leave on is that although back in 2000, like I did a little bit of research, and Dr. Hassan Bagby had put out the mosque report in 2011, so the year after I'd become Muslim. And it was something like 50% of, over more than 50% of mosques had reported having women on their boards at that point in time. And although I still know very few women who are executive directors of communities, a lot of that is just chalked up to the way institutions are organized and funded, really. And so I think that piece around what can we do to get over our imposter syndrome as Muslim women in leadership spaces? How can we bolster ourselves with education and training and support? And how can we uplift all of the work that Muslim women have been doing behind the scenes and are now starting to do more of in front of the scenes, to be able to empower other people to know that, hey, it's okay for you to do this, and there's space, and like, this is divine work. This is work that's prophetic, and you too can do this work. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Over to Ida.
Thank you. So I thought I'll start the questions off, and I want to encourage people to please type in some questions in the Q&A. We're waiting for those. We're looking forward to them as well. I just thought I'd ask, is there a particular instance you can share that when times are bad, you think about in your experience that pushes you to keep doing what you are doing? And whoever wants to start, I don't want to pick on anybody. So I'll leave it to David to pick on people.
I had to say it one more time. Say it one more time.
Please.
So is there any particular instance you can share, a personal instance, any particular instance you can share that when times are bad, you think about that instance and that pushes you to keep going and keep doing what you are doing?
So as an African-American woman who has been told from youth the things that I could not do, the things I would not achieve. So every time I come up against something, when someone tells me that's not for you, I think back to those moments, and there is a spirit within me that reminds me that I am fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and I am able to do all things. And so I press my way. And so that again has happened from childhood because of, I'll say twofold. One, because of the color of my skin, and the other because of my gender. Especially being in a denomination now, and I see it even more prevalent, where it is majority white male. Praise be to God. And now there are 23 bishops in the Evangelical Lutheran Church who happen to be women. And so I'm grateful for that. However, whenever I come up against an obstacle or a challenge, I draw back on those incidents and the spirit within me that says, no, that's not true. This is who you are, and this is what you can do.
Please, Jane. You have to unmute yourself.
It says I'm muted by the host. No. Now can you hear me speak? Yes. All right. I can't think of one particular instance that has urged me to continue, but my extreme pleasure, my joy in what I did for a long time. There were upsets, there were bad days, there were all of that, but in general, I was so charged up by the experiences I had with students at all the institutions that I taught, but maybe most at Hartford Seminary, that I simply went on and on. I continued because I didn't want to give up the pleasure that I had and the excitement. So I ended up retiring about a decade after the 65-year retirement, which I guess has probably changed some now anyway. But in general, I just could not think of leaving it until the time came and I knew that it was appropriate, but it was with real sadness.
I would like to say something. For me, what encourages me to move forward, even when there are obstacles, like someone telling me as a Muslim woman, I shouldn't be doing this or that, is my mother. My mother was a very strong woman, and she raised us to do whatever we can do. That carries me a lot.
I would say that especially like the more that I'm diving into Islamic studies in general, there's so many examples from our tradition that really feed me and get me really excited about being a woman and cultivating deeper relationships with God. So one of my current favorites has to do with Khawla, who is the woman who inspired the woman who cries in the Quran. There's a chapter named after her, and the backstory of that is she's experiencing some familial challenges, to say the least. She goes running to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and is like, listen, what do you have for me? Like, something's got to give me something. And he's like, I don't have any revelation to address your specific situation right now. So she's like, cool, no worries, I've got you. She goes back to her house and then prays to God directly. She's like, I'm good. I'm going to, Allah has my back. I believe it. I'm talking to your supervisor. I'm going to complain to the supervisor. And sure enough, revelation comes directly addressing her specific situation. And so for me, when I think about challenges, this is something that I pull on a lot, where it's like, I can, God is listening to us. God is with us. And when I'm going through it or having doubts, I can just turn and complain to God. And so I think that piece, I really love that. And that keeps me going. And yeah. And usually anything else kind of just drifts away once I get my mind. I'm like, okay, Khawla, I'm channeling Khawla.
Thank you so much. So I'm looking at the Q&A. And I'm going from the top. I don't know if this is the right order to do it in, but the first question I have on my list is to Sister Fatma Anta. How is being a Muslim leader within a numerical minority community in the USA different from being a Muslim leader within a numerically majority community in Egypt? And how does this impact your understanding to the dynamic of power in the USA?
Okay. We are talking about the leadership within the Muslim community serving Muslims. In Egypt, because I came to United States in 1974, women did not even go to the mosque. we prayed at home. Now they do. But there is no such thing as really leadership position, leading prayer or things like that. You could have women professors of theology, at the university level. That is a different thing. We come here to the United States, people are coming from different parts of the world. They have their own experiences. And unfortunately, many of us carry all of those thoughts with us and try to implement it here. So actually, my story is a bit similar to Lauren. The first mosque I went to was very conservative, and we had an issue. And that is why 5 families, including my family, left and started the Berlin Mosque. And when we started, we wanted it to be open. Because here we want to educate our kids in a balanced Islamic way. In Egypt, it's all around us because that is a majority Muslim country. So the dynamic is so different. There is more room here in the United States to be a leader within the Muslim community, where in Egypt, it is not really.
Thank you, Papa. The next question goes to, I just had it here. 1 second.
Ida, you are home.
I am. So the next question goes to Reverend Davenport, and it keeps on going off my screen, so hold on 1 second.
I have it here, Ida, if you need.
Okay, because it keeps on dropping off my screen. Do you want to read it,
Sure.
Steve? Thank you so much.
Yeah, there's 2 here, but I'll go with the first one for Reverend Davenport. After you collected all information and seen the condition about your church and society, what were the core problems that you had to pick up to address in your leadership?
So I'll answer that question twofold. So when elected, coming into the thought that churches are in decline and the financial ramifications of that for the larger church. We are one church with 3 expressions. And so there's the congregational expression and the synodical expression, and then our church-wide organization. And so coming in to deal with that, but here, and also coming into, again, a predominantly white church and everything that goes with that. I'm an African-American woman coming into a denomination that's predominantly white, that a conference of bishops that's predominantly white male. And so those are some of the things that one has to deal with. But I laughed to myself as I thought about this opportunity to share. I was elected, and guess what? The job description didn't change. Whether it was for a man who was elected or a woman, the job description didn't change. So my responsibilities are the same. However, I'm confronted with those underlying undercurrents of systemic racism. Someone else had asked the question of systemic racism, where I have to show up and I have to be better than any man who was elected. I have to be better than any other person around the table who doesn't have a darker hue. So those are some of the things that I deal with on the norm. But again, other than that, technically I am the CEO of a large nonprofit. I'm responsible for 340 rostered ministers, that's clergy and deacons. I'm responsible for 70,000 people who are members of our communities of faith, and every responsibility that comes with that, especially those 340 rostered ministers who come with varied backgrounds.
You might have already answered it, but I think you probably did. What were some of the preparations in your role of bishop? You kind of went into it a bit, but it probably never ends.
I'll tell you this real quick because I want my other sisters to be able to share more on their stories. The funny thing is, a funny thing happened when I was on the way to our assembly. I had no idea that I would be elected bishop. So again, you show up. And then to be elected by such a large number, and again, by a predominantly white assembly, I am in awe of how the Holy Spirit works. I trust that at times people are able to see the gifts or see the Spirit at work and flow with the Spirit. I'm going to trust that. Of course, I've been in the church all of my life. I've served 30 years in administration. And I trust some of those gifts kind of rose to the top.
Okay, I'm going to scroll down a little more here. So the next one is for Dr. Fatma. Are there some challenges from your community connecting to women leadership? How do you tackle those challenges?
Assalamu alaikum. Yes, there are always, there are men that will say, oh, you should not be speaking loudly, meaning your voice is not permissible. And that is why I always say it is very important that you know enough about your religion. And from my experience, because I became very active and I am a doer, like many other women. I'm not the only one, by the way. So I'm respected because of that. If you look at actually how women in Egypt gained their rights, they did the same thing. Working hard, doing a lot of service for the community. People recognize them, they feel comfortable with them, and you know, you kind of prove yourself. As a result, those minor voices that sometimes we get from men are kind of, you know, put aside. It takes not only women to work hard and achieve, but also it takes men. Like, for example, I think Ali, my husband, opened the doors for me. He knew about my abilities and, you know, he supported me. If Ali was not supportive, I don't think we would be here today. So it takes both men and women. It is not only the responsibility of women, it is the responsibility of men. Thank you.
Okay, here's one for Jane. Directed, I am designing a restorative justice component to interfaith peace building for my Doctor of Ministry degree at Claremont School of Theology. If you were going to use something like this to teach, what are one or two aspects would you hope were included to engage Christian and Muslims on a deeper level when addressing restoring themselves and their relationships?
I think that that is a difficult question to answer in the abstract. So I would answer it by saying, if I were constructing a course or some kind of means of bringing people together to talk, I would hear from them what circumstances would direct that they focus on from the environment in which they come and supposedly are familiar. Justice issues are, of course, these days everywhere on everybody's tongue. less so before, but nonetheless extremely important. So I would do almost a case study kind of course where perhaps we had 3 or 4 instances to focus on, and we would discuss together what are the issues that should be addressed and addressed by everybody that's involved in this. So it's a community effort with specific foci in the course of however many weeks we had to talk together. We would start with specifics.
This one is kind of a general one that I'm going to direct to the whole group here. How are the centers that you lead provide training, or how do the centers that you lead provide training and academic support for Muslim women in their aspiration for spiritual leadership?
I can speak to this one a little bit. So we're kind of like a on the ground community based like initiative. So it's kind of like an all hands on deck kind of opportunity. Our core team of like volunteers, it's basically our staff, are mostly women, and a lot of times we're peer educating each other. So for example, we've got folks on our core team who are therapists by trade. So then they're coming in and training the community and other team members on mental health best practices. And so really that idea of, as a leader, looking for the skills that people have within our community and figuring out how to invite them in to uplift others is like, we want you to speak. Have you been invited to speak before? Maybe not. Let me support you in how to put together a presentation, or like, I'll teach you how to facilitate XYZ things. So a lot of that's been our like internal approach. Another thing we've done as Center DC is also direct the other trainings that are happening. So the AMACLE, the American Muslim Civic Leadership Initiative, they do like a leadership training that's not just for women, but it's for everybody. And I was able to participate in the training and really benefited from it. Sending people to go to the Alim program in Chicago where they can beef up their Islamic ed. Our board really supports me going to Hartford Seminary, and part of how I'm on salary, like me being able to be part-time paid at Center DC enables me to be able to go to Hartford Seminary. And that was something that the board talked about and wanting to like work it in the budget so that we're able to like have a professional development budget that can help support our leadership team grow at Center DC. Those are a couple of the ways that we're doing it both internally and using external resources, because there's a lot of training that's available that's happening already to help bolster Muslim women.
Ida, I'll probably throw it back to you. I think we went through most of the questions. I believe so.
I just realized I was muted, sorry. So as we come to sort of the end, I just wanted to throw out a question in terms of challenges. I mean, you have shared a few of your challenges, but what is one challenge that you you were really pushed to the hilt and you were able to overcome? Not everyone at once. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Can you hear me now? Yes. My challenge, the one that I was presented with right from the beginning, is what right did I have as a non-Muslim, and for a while also as a woman, to be speaking about Islam, to presume that I am teaching Islam, and particularly when I was teaching Islam to Muslims. And I thought a great deal about that. I think the fact is that times have changed, and it wouldn't be an issue now because I think, as far as I can tell, teaching positions in Islam are generally given to well-qualified Muslims. But it was an issue for me, and I handled it by addressing it with my students, not right at the beginning, But later on, after we had a chance to get to know each other, and not by directly saying, so what do you think, am I qualified or not, but by easing into the issue, sometimes by the side door, and getting people to think about it, to think, what does it mean to teach another religious tradition from the one in which you were raised? And everybody could engage in that, and that helped me think about it, and it helps them think about it.
For me, I think the big challenge, beside being a woman, is organizing. You know, I like when I do something to have it well organized, and that has been a challenge. But you know, every day is better than the next. And I know what you are talking about, Jane, and you are absolutely right. But you are a wonderful scholar of Islam.
So I'll say the one challenge that I deal with on a regular is being able to discern whether I'm being invited to the table as a token or I'm being invited to the table because of the gifts that I bring. And so that is always a challenge, considering I know that there are not that many women of color who serve as judicatories, heads of their judicatories. And so, you know, it's kind of a balancing act.
Rev Patricia, I want to know the secret. We can talk offline. I want to know how you figure that out.
I'm gonna tell you. This. Pray for me. Just pray for me, because I deal with conflict the way I deal with everything else, and that's directly. Yes. And so I really, you know, I basically just ask the question. So tell me the truth. Are you inviting me here because I'm a woman? Are you inviting me here because I'm an African American woman? Are you inviting me here because I have 30 years of experience in administration in the church, or because I'm a developer at heart and I know how to do outreach? So just tell me, because I can deal with covert better. I can deal with overt better than I can overt. And so, you know, and that's basically how I'm able to show up and survive. And I think just being true to my own self.
Oh man, that's amazing. If I could be a fly on the wall for those faces when they're not ready for that question. Oh man, I think somebody had put a question in that was talking about other women that have been inspirations to you. And I think the challenge for me, which I feel like kind of I was dancing around, really is just not seeing other women doing the jobs that I'm doing. So many times, like I'll start a project or start doing a thing, and like I can check in with my scholars, the mentors that I have, to be like, hey, is this cool if I do this? And like if they give me the green light and go ahead, theologically I'm like, okay, well then bismillah, like let's just give this a try and see how it goes. And so I think that the biggest challenge was not before, when I didn't have those people to consult, like Sheikha Aisha Prime, when I couldn't call her up and be like, hey, what do you think about this? When I didn't have that network of support to be able to bolster me doing something that I hadn't seen somebody else do in community, that was like one of the hardest places to be in, because then I'm just like looking for guidance, looking for somebody to back me up, and really feeling like that part of what community is that collective backing people up. But unless there's a knowledge basis or a framework that's shared, ideally like a traditional Islamic framework from like the way that I operate, like my goal isn't to like make it up or do something different or like reform or change or none of that. Like the tradition is vast and can hold a variety of experiences. And so for me, it's how to navigate that tradition with a guide who I trust and support, and then being able to articulate that to other people who might be wondering, like, where are you getting this from? How is this going? But overwhelmingly, thank God, a lot of people are just hungry to see women in leadership positions, I think, and have been really warmly received. I've been really warmly received in my community of like, it's so great to see somebody who looks like you doing this work. And now I think maybe I can do some of this work too. So I think that not seeing it enough is like part of the gift. It's part of the challenge, but also the gift that I'm able to for God to be able to work through me, to be able to show other people like this is possible, is like the silver lining of that challenge.
Great, thank you. So I had a question in terms of, all your experience, and, sort of when you look at the young people, the young women, what advice would you give them? What warnings might you give them in terms of going into leadership positions in the future? Yes, Dr. Smith.
I would tell them to know ahead of time that being a leader is much more difficult for women than it is for men. Men might argue this, but it's been my experience and the experience of many other women with whom I've spoken that we walk a much tighter line. There's not very much room at the top like this, because it's so easy to slide down here of being too sweet and too nice and not being strong in leadership, or sliding down here of being a bossy woman, just the kind that we don't want to have leading us. So figuring out how you can stay on this narrow platform without sliding down either side, you can do it, but it takes a little thinking about. And if you recognize ahead of time that that's the way it's probably going to be, you'll be more successful.
May I say amen to that?
You may.
Very good. It's always a good idea to have a balance. You don't want to come too strong and you don't want to be weak either. I agree. But one of the things that I think, as Muslims, I feel that I never wanted or went into situations because I want to be a leader. I want to serve God and I want to serve the community. And I think that has to be an internal decision. As a result, when I get into something, I have to have that passion to do. And when you have the passion to do, you tend to succeed. I never went into situations because I want to be a leader, never.
Can I also add something to what Dr. Smith said? And that is about having, surrounding yourself with wise women, with other wise women. And so I'm grateful to have sisters of all faiths that I'm able to share some of the joys as well as some of the challenges, and to be able to have a safe space where you can come and just be and be able to share. And so I think that in that space, for me, it's important to have younger women in that space so that they can learn. So a part of not only role modeling, but mentoring and bringing them along, and especially because I know that they're not too, well, I'm grateful because we have a presiding bishop who's a woman. We're celebrating 50-40-10, so 50 years of ordination for my white siblings, and 40 years for women of color, and 10 years for the LGBTQIA+ community. So we're celebrating those. And so I'm able to have a community who understands the struggle. So I surround myself with people from each one of those communities, as well as our interfaith community, to be able to, again, talk about some of the challenges, because again, like you said, you know, it's all about how we serve, how we build up the kingdom of God, how we be beloved community with one another. And so we can't do that in a silo in one denomination. We do that together. And so I'm grateful to be able to, in this position, to be able to invite people into the circle or to be invited into circles to serve.
Okay, thank you so much. I was just waiting to see if anybody else had anything more to say. I'm just wondering, have any of you, you've been speaking individually, but I noticed a little conversation between Lauren and the Reverend. Is there anything that you would like to ask your fellow panelists? I'm putting it on you now.
I don't, well, I have lots of questions that I could ask them, but how about I just end this with a word of gratitude, just deep gratitude for your willingness not only to be in this conversation, but the depth of what you shared and how it speaks to me. What you don't know is a lot of times I'm taking notes. So if you see me look down, it's because I wrote something. But again, just a heartfelt thanks to my sisters for their willingness to serve.
Oh my gosh, right back at you. I'm in awe as well of like I'm in such good company, mashallah. Like what an amazing group of folks. I want to like come sit with in your women's circles. Like, let's go, send me an invitation. And I think the other part is when Dr. Jane was speaking about the bells and the feminist bells. I was just like floored, and they give me so much anxiety just hearing you talk about that. And I feel like I could sit and take multiple classes with you on feminism in general. I would love to do that because of the wealth of experience, and I just want to know all about how you navigated that in a religious space.
I have to say something about, when you greet people within a conversation, when you are in the middle of a meeting, they always say brothers, and right away everybody looks at me and they say, and sisters, because I know that is coming, so they say it themselves. I think this is a big challenge, but God created us in this position in order to remind our brothers and sisters that we have to work together to serve the community. Men cannot be working alone, and women cannot work alone. Together we can achieve all kinds of things.
So I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I said the cutoff time was 8:15, and it's nearly 8:15. It's 8:14. So I'm going to pass the baton over to David, and thank you so much, all of you, for such a beautiful conversation. I learned a lot, as did our attendees. So thank you all very, very much for your participation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm grateful to be brought into this, just listening to everything you had to offer and to share. It's amazing, and I know that there will be tonight and tomorrow lots of Facebook hits on this particular Hartford Seminary post, because you've just given us a great treasure that will go out. And so thank you for being willing to share your stories with us, with one another. We are truly grateful. So thank you. I don't want to end it, but I have to. that's the bottom line. So we're coming near the end of the conference. We've had 3 days, and even though we had to shift gears from a face-to-face conference in our meeting space. This has really taken off, and I'm thankful that we've had this platform to be able to use. I want to introduce, for a final session for a few moments, introduce my colleague, Dr. Hossein Kamali. He recently published a book, A History of Islam in 21 Women, from One World Publishing, and it was reviewed by New York Times, and it got very favorable reviews. Given the topic of our conference, I thought this would be perfect just to allow him to share a little bit about the book, and I know that you'll be interested in the topic. So at this point, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Hossein Kamali, Associate Professor of Islamic Studies and holder of the Imam Ali Chair for Shi'i Studies and Dialogue among Islamic Legal Schools. Dr. Kamali.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start with a word of gratitude, just as Reverend Davenport aptly ended with a word of gratitude. Thank you, Professor Grafton, for your kind introduction. And at these final minutes of our Luce Hartford conference, I'd like to thank, besides Professor Grafton, all the organizers of the conference, our dear colleagues at the Hartford Seminary, Ms. Susan Schoenberger, Mr. Stephen Havira, Ms. Ida Mansour, and everyone else. And I want to thank the panelists and the attendees. I benefited from listening to our keynote speakers on Monday, and very briefly last night before I lost my Wi-Fi connection. Again, maybe there are just too many people watching Netflix at night in my building, maybe. I'm grateful for having the opportunity and the privilege to say a few words at the end of this successful conference on the agency and vital voices of women. As Professor Grafton said, I recently published a book titled A History of Islam in 21 Women. It was released in Britain back in September 2019, and then in India in October of that year, and more recently in the United States as of March 2020. Yes, with all the madness. To the best of my knowledge, a Turkish edition is in preparation. A French publisher that had signed on to bring out an edition in French suddenly had a change of heart. And the reason for that decision, as explicitly divulged and expressed in an email to my British publisher, One World Publication, was that the book is too positive in its portrayal of Islam and the role of women in Islam and Islamic history. Believe it or not. Okay, let me assure you of something. I'm not here to sell books. Rather, I hope I can present a main idea, one of the main ideas behind it, especially as it relates to the theme of our conference this year. Through a selection of biographies of women who lived from the 7th century to the present, I have illustrated the fact that women's agency has manifested itself quite noticeably throughout the history of Islam. I have attempted to rethink how we tell the story of Islam and the lived expressions of Muslims without privileging kings, caliphs, and various privileged classes of men of religious learning. These are all too common categories, and so many books tell us about the rise and fall of the caliphate, the legacy of this or that empire, and the unfoldings of Islamic law, Sufism, and so on and so forth. Now, thanks to good scholarship, especially since the 1980s, we have several important studies on women in Islamic societies. This has been most important in refuting the toxic misogyny that pervades so-called Orientalist views of Islam. Let me cite an example. Here's how one of the most influential Orientalist works concludes in its final paragraph. I quote, "The resulting emotional repertoire of Islamic culture was a decidedly unromantic one. The only obverse to the gravitas of the Muslims is the giggling of their womenfolk." End quote. Sorry. Indeed, it calls for an apology even to read such a tendentious summation of 14 centuries of Muslim history. Seeking to avoid such problematic and misleading readings, I thought, and I still think, what we needed and what we still need is to narrate the history of Islam, or histories of Islam, in the plural, in ways that take the agency and subjectivity of women into account. A quick word about the theoretical outlook that inspired my attempt at writing this history, a history of Islam, around the biographies of women. In short, it's this: to neglect or to deny agency threatens its very existence. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. And I know you're not in the business here to sell books, but if you do Google it, you'll find it on Google, and you'll also see a previous note about it on our Hartford Seminary website. So thank you very much, Dr. Kamali. So
Thank you again for the opportunity.
You're welcome. We've come to the end of our conference, and I'm glad you all stayed. You stuck it out, and we've all been the richer for it for the past 3 days. So thank you very much. If you have, well, you have all registered for it, you will be receiving an evaluation form through your email. Please do take the opportunity to fill that out. I do want to say one thing in terms of what's coming up at Hartford Seminary this week, and I think maybe I'll just share my screen. So let's see if I can find it. There we go. So this coming June 12th, Beverly Daniel Tatum, who is an alum of Hartford Seminary, will be having the second of our conversations on where do we go from here. And it was begun by Dr. Benjamin Watts, who started the conversation last week. So I do hope that you'll come back to Hartford Seminary for that. You can register for that online, and it would be great to see you all there. Susan, we have the poll. If you could release the poll, we want to see where our participants today learned about this particular conference and where you heard about it and how you got your information. Okay, so well over half of the participants are receiving our email newsletter. Many are being invited. I don't know about, I know Bishop Davenport knows this, but it's often said that Lutherans invite people to church once in their lifetime. So it's great that we're actually having people invited to these conferences. So that's great. Get the word out. Facebook 17%, and then referral by another organization. So it's great that we're getting people from a variety of different ways and places. So thank you so much. I want to thank you all for joining us for this conference. If you've enjoyed the 4th annual 2020 Luce Hartford Conference on Christian-Muslim Relations, then keep your eyes and ears posted for an announcement this fall for the 5th annual in 2021. Whether it will be face-to-face or online is yet to be determined. We will see. So be well and be safe and be blessed, everyone. Thank you.